Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. My name is Sergey Ganisyan. Economic reforms remain one of the biggest priorities for Ukrainian government. And today we're going to talk about the implementation of these changes with our guest, Yuliya Kovaliv, Ukraine's first Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Ms. Kovaliv, thank you very much for joining me. Ms. Kovaliv, previous Minister of Economic Development and Trade, Ivars Abramovičius, in 2015 announced a lot of grand reforms, complex reforms, like namely public procurement system and business deregulation. So how are things going with these reforms, considering that Abramovičius is no longer a minister in Ukrainian government?
Hello, and thanks for this discussion and the opportunity just to tell you about the continuity of all of the reform agenda here inside the Ministry of Economy. Last year, because all of our deputy ministers within the new government stayed and will still go on implementing the reform agenda, we have previously led by Ivars and currently led by First Vice Prime Minister Kyiv. In terms of all the priorities of the ministry, I would say that there are no significant changes in the key reform agenda, starting from one of the, I would say, most popular reform that had a widely big coverage of all of the people and the stakeholders, mainly is the public procurement reform. And here I'd like to stress that now we are currently on the phase of implementation of this reform, so all of the needed legislation was adopted and supported by the parliament.
And it's already bringing success for Ukraine, right? When Ukraine could save up money by purchasing things by using this system, right?
For sure, starting from the 1st of April, most of the public bodies, those who are financed directly through the state budget, are now purchasing all the goods and services through the system of ProZorro. So everybody, starting from journalists and activists and our, of course, NABU and other state bodies can follow the tenders, can see how we save the money each day. And this is the example of how good reforms are implemented and what are their results, because from day to day we're really saving the budget money. But moreover, there are a lot of small and medium and even big businesses who directly can participate in public tenders, because previously most of them were bundled to directly be involved in those tenders. We have the big retailers who are now supporting foods and other goods to Ukrainian army. We have a big SMEs who are currently directly can support all of the government bodies with some goods. So there is a big impact on the business of this kind of reform. And another thing, it's a big impact on saving budget, and it's really crucial for us.
Could you please provide any estimation about how much money Ukraine managed to save?
We now estimate that for this year we are expecting around 5 billion of hryvnias to be, it is the economy of open public procurement system. But in general, if we will implement it more actively, because we now started not from the beginning of the year, so we will estimate that the result could be up to 50 billion of hryvnias.
And what about other reforms, such as business deregulation and, most importantly, privatization of state companies, which Abramovičius himself called the main factor for economic growth?
So I think we should separate, because there are two different things. One is the business climate and the deregulation, and we call it not even the regulation, but smart regulation. And here we are moving each day on presenting the amendments to the legal acts and implementing those legal acts in terms of getting rid of unnecessary regulation, licenses, and other permissions which are really bundled for the Ukrainian business. Moreover, we, at the end of last year, we presented to the Cabinet of Ministers a big action plan of deregulation, which will lead Ukraine to top 20 doing business rating countries in 2 years. And that's why we really have the action plan. We are now drafting and presenting to Cabinet of Ministers many of legislation. But there is one issue we deal with, not only with this current government, but it was the issue for the previous government, but still they are not now approved by our parliament. And each day of delay of approving this legislation will also delay the positive changes to our business society. So that's why we are really expecting that despite of all the political discussion we have now in the country, those legislation will be supported and adopted by our parliament.
But if they didn't approve it earlier, why would you expect them to approve it these days?
Because I think that many of them, and we are talking to different groups of our politicians and members of parliament, it's very hard for them to say why do they don't support this legislation, because all of them want to be positive in terms of their voters, in terms of business, and in terms of overall population, because it mostly will influence firstly to the small and medium business, which should be the basis of Ukrainian economy, on the contrary of those big financial groups we have now led by many of oligarchs.
So can we say that the main reason for absence of these reforms is because is the parliament's procrastination? Is that correct?
There is much to do inside the parliament. Still, I don't think that it's only the bottleneck is only the parliament. There are also, even in the processes of cabinet of ministers, some delays, because when the new cabinet comes, you need to approve all of the legislation one more time because it states also by the law. So there will be also I would say 1 or 2 months delay in terms of cabinet procedures, but it's quite natural. It's in many of the countries such regulation is. But for example, we made a good legislation in terms of reform of all the controlling bodies. Still, these laws need to be still approved by the second reading in Parliament. The same, for example, you also mentioned privatization. There were 11 times we put on the voting a small draft law in order to open the transparent privatization. So it took us 4 months with a very hard discussion within the parliament to do it. And today we have a separate, our chief vice prime minister, who is also the minister of economy, Stepan Kubiev. He's in charge of those dialogue with parliament and coordinating the legal work and the dialogue between cabinet and the parliament.
But what's the hold-up here? Why exactly is Ukrainian parliament being not so active when it comes to approving these bills?
I think there are some of the issues. One of the laws are really tackling all those ways that political interest some of the members of parliament is. So it's very hard to, to cut their own hands in terms of, for example, privatization, good corporate governance, and other things. Another thing is really that our parliament actively is working only 2 days a week, and it's not enough if we want to perform reform more active and more quicker. So that's why we have only, in practical scale, we have only Tuesday and Thursday, which are the dates when the members of parliament are still really actively working on their agenda. So there are a lot of factors. Then they were electing general prosecutor, then they were electing new prime minister. So it was much about the big political discussion in terms of day-to-day active work on the reform agenda. But hopefully all these big political issues have finished, and now we really have a big challenge between all of us, both government and parliament, to implement all those legislation we and members of parliament also introduced in order just to go to the common result for the country.
And in what time frame, what deadline do you have to implement this, if you have any, to implement these legislations and reforms eventually?
For sure, our inner deadlines are very tough, but still you can't move on when you don't have the adopted laws. So that's why as soon as possible, so from our side we are ready actively to implement them. But before they are adopted and voted in parliament, we can't do it. So that's why, we are of course a little bit late in terms of our proposed schedule, but still we hope that till the end of this session of parliament, much will be supported.
And you have been also assigned as the head of the supervisory board of Naftogaz, Ukraine's biggest oil and gas company, right? What are your duties here?
I would say that firstly, it's one of the biggest cases on the implementation of corporate governance reform in terms of Ukrainian state-owned enterprises. And it's only the beginning, it's only the first case, but I think and I hope that we will go through all of these procedures with also top biggest SOEs like Ukrzaliznytsia, Ukrposhta and others. There are two ideas and two periods in terms of what is really the supervisory board in charge of. We have such called transition period, which is started currently and will end by the 1st of April next year, when a supervisory board in mostly will advise to the shareholder, which is the Ministry of Economy, on certain things in terms of strategy, budget, financial plans, remuneration, audit things, and etc. But starting from the 1st of April next year, the responsibilities and the duties of the board will be much increased, starting from the approval of the budget of the company, approval of the strategy of the company, approval of the management of the company. So starting from the 1st of April of next year, the supervisory board will have a lot of duties in order to reform the company and to make it more transparent, to make it as like their peers abroad, which are the biggest oil and gas companies. We have also three international independent members of the supervisory board. All of them had a decent experience of major oil and gas companies worldwide, and with the help of their experience, we will for sure start to change and transform the company into the good performing and successful company, oil and gas company in Europe.
Is it not successful already? Because I think that previous government also made its changes to how the company was managed, and I think they really praised the changes.
Of course, and we had together with government and the company made a very significant changes in terms of not only the company performance but also on the gas market and energy security of the country. Starting of diversification of gas flow, starting of the new gas law which increased the competitiveness on the overall gas market. It will also influence on the company and its performance. Still, of course, the company is really one of the biggest, not only in the oil gas sector, but still it's really one of the biggest companies in Ukraine. And of course, all of the inside procedures of the company are still not on the 100% level, so there much is to be done to make it more successful. And we also had one project on the table. This project is the unbundling, and we are now in the discussion between the Ministry of Energy, Naftogaz, and our European partners of how to proceed this unbundling, which will be fully compliant with the third energy package we are implementing now.
Yeah, it seems like a really difficult task, and I can only wish you good luck with implementing all these changes. Ms. Kovaliv, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
You've been watching Ukraine Today. I've been joined by Yuliya Kovaliv, Ukraine's first Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Many thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time.